William Nylander scores in overtime again as the Maple Leafs edge the Minnesota Wild 2-1. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena. The Maple Leafs slogging through and beating the Minnesota Wild 2-1 in overtime thanks to a superb goal by William Nylander, maybe the best goal that he's scored all season long. Pretty crazy to say, considering he's scored a lot of amazing goals so far this year, Dave. But I felt like we were transported back into the late 90s, early 2000s tonight with this type of hockey game. Just a very defensive-minded Minnesota Wild team, and the Maple Leafs, of course, willing to play ball and being patient. They had to wait all the way until overtime to get that goal, but definitely a tough one, I think, if you were a paying fan tonight and having to watch this one at Scotiabank Arena.
Yeah, this was certainly difficult. I mean, when you go and you want to see top stars score and it's only 3 goals total in the game, it certainly is difficult, but it could have been very different. I mean, early on, a Wild player shoots from distance and it looked like it beat Ilya Samsonov. It just happens to go off the post, and the Leafs are very fortunate in that regard that things didn't go off the rails pretty quickly. Otherwise, we could have been talking about something completely different than this. But yeah, I mean, it's a maturity thing, right? Like, the Leafs know who their opponent is, and so instead of just trying to stick to one method of winning games, which is just pepper the opponent and hope that you get the offense going and not get beat the other way, sit back a little bit, play tight defensively, and don't leave a lot of space. It's kind of like how Montreal played against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the playoffs in 2021, although Toronto didn't match defensively in that regard. So credit to them. They managed to kind of do that. Kind of similar to what we saw back on November 6th, I'd say, against the Carolina Hurricanes, when Carolina wasn't giving them a lot of space and they had a third-string goalie. Toronto had a third-string goalie going in. They just kind of had to sit back and wait for their chances. And so that's exactly what Toronto did tonight, and they were rewarded for it, getting the point to go to overtime. And then William
Yeah, definitely a playoff type of feel with Minnesota's low event grind you into a pulp style. I mean, you have to give them credit, of course, playing on the back-to-back on the second half after being in Columbus on Thursday. I think it was their third game in 4 nights. I believe it was even their fourth game in 6 nights. So, I mean, they've been playing a lot of hockey of late and definitely did not look worse for wear in this one. So the Maple Leafs definitely sticking to the plan here, which I'm sure made Sheldon Keefe very happy. Let's hear from the head coach of the Maple Leafs, who expected this one to be a meat grinder of a game.
They're the number 1 team in the NHL defending the rush. They're not going to give you much there. So we got to look at how we were in Buffalo. I mean, we thrived on plays on the rush, and there's sort of 2 ends of the spectrum. Buffalo gives up a lot on the rush. They get a lot on the rush. It's a really wide open game when you're playing there, and then you come in and play this team. It's going to be far different. And, I thought we adapted to that, stayed patient, didn't get frustrated, didn't open the game up, didn't take unnecessary risk or chances. Obviously, our power play, you'd like to see it strike, and win the game there for us. But, defensively, I thought we were right there with them in terms of the patience. And, we needed to make a play to score a goal. Stop, and took us overtime for Will to get it done there.
And it's always hard to know, if coaches love these types of games, because on the one hand, there's not a ton of offense going, and Sheldon Keefe is happy that his team stuck to the plan and were able to, figure out how to get 2 points in this one, Dave. But it wasn't a great game necessarily that the Maple Leafs played either. There were a bunch of moments in this game where Minnesota was able to hem them in their own end. Their forecheck was really strong. Some poor turnovers by the Maple Leafs that luckily didn't end up in the back of their net, but it wasn't as if the Leafs played a very crisp game in this one either.
Yeah, the mark of a good game for the Maple Leafs with typical opponents and getting positive results is when they have the better expected goals for. We're used to seeing that from the Toronto Maple Leafs, or even the better high danger chances. But I mean, at 5-on-5, you've got 60% for Minnesota in there, and 69% of the high danger scoring chances. So that's pretty significant in the Wild's favor. And so I mean, I think that's all credit to Ilya Samsonov, because as shaky as he looked in that first period, he really held the fort there, especially early in that second period when Minnesota looked like they were doing that road thing that teams do, which is survive the first and then try to take the game over with the crowd out of it in that second period. And Samsonov, in my opinion anyway, was a lot of the reason why they ended up winning this game.
All right, well, let's get to that overtime winner, and it was Nylander's third OT goal this season. He walked us through the OT winner when speaking to the media post-game.
I don't know, just lifted a stick. I mean, first lost it in the corner, and then left a stick, and then tried to take it to the net, and got a step, and I think the goalie tried to poke it away and put it under his glove. Tried to go high, but went under. We'll take it.
When you steal the puck as you did and you turn, you see Matt Boldy, a forward between you and the net, do you recognize that's a forward? I might be able to beat the guy wide?
Yeah, I knew there was a forward there, so I just tried to take it to the net, and I saw there's kind of flat-footed there, so it was going to be hard if I hit him with some speed.
And just an incredible effort by Nylander, who, loses that puck initially to Frederick Gaudreau and then is able to get the puck back with a one-handed stick check. I tried to watch the replay a couple of times. It was hard to tell from that angle if it was maybe in the gloves, maybe if it's, in regulation time, maybe he gets called on a penalty on that, but things they let slide maybe a little bit in overtime. But still, just an incredible job by Nylander to get that puck back, and then he beats Matt Boldy, then he beats Philip Gustafsson, and ultimately puts that goal in the net. Where do you think that ranks this year for goals by a Maple Leaf? Like, I think of John Tavares undressing Travis Sanheim earlier this year against the Flyers. Yeah. That might have been the most impressive goal by a Leaf this year, but I think this one definitely has a case.
There was a Marner diving goal in overtime that a lot of people reminded me when I went very hyperbole on how crazy that goal was in terms of, which of course was great also. But I mean, that really was the all-around William Nylander, defensively, offensively, strip and score, doing everything. Also having that recognition, as he mentioned, to see that it was a forward there where he's able to kind of go over and make that extra play to kind of put the puck into the net and really kind of get things going. It was a good play. It was perfectly executed. And it's really just another step in the evolution of William Nylander this season. It's why he's leading the team in goals. And it's why he might be the team MVP for this season right now, the way things kind of stand. Early on, we were talking about Mitch Marner. Austin Matthews, who's the reigning MVP, is having a bit of a down year in terms statistically, also kind of playing hurt and all those kind of things. And, Leafs kind of get Ryan O'Reilly, and some of the attention is shifted away from Nylander, but then he comes right back and he just continues to score consistently, and he's been clutch. And there was no better example than tonight with what number 88 did tonight.
Yeah, phenomenal performance by William Nylander there in overtime to get the winner. And it's funny thinking back to the beginning of the season, the first couple of months, Dave, where the Leafs couldn't get a win in overtime, and everybody was wondering, oh, geez, is this going to be a problem all season long? We remember that Sheldon Keefe went to the two defensemen to start overtime for a little bit of a stretch there. We saw Ryan O'Reilly, Mitch Marner, and I believe it was Timothy Liljegren start OT tonight. So clearly those days are gone now when you've got a guy like Ryan O'Reilly who can start OT for you. But this really just hasn't been a conversation because the Leafs have been able to, win games in OT. I think we all knew that eventually things would turn around. But, now that they've got, Ryan O'Reilly as someone that they can start OT with, it just adds, another dynamic to their overtime plans, that you've got a guy that you can trust both offensively and defensively. Whereas before, with David Kampf, it was win a face-off and get off the ice, or, lose a face-off and, have to defend for a little bit. So just gives Sheldon Keefe more options, as we continually talk about with the addition of Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah, I like that they started with him out there and changed everything up there, because that Kampf, Sandin, or one Sandin was available, but Kampf and then the two defensemen there was just such a ridiculous setup. I get why they were doing it. Things were going so wrong in overtime for a while. Nick Robertson had the only overtime goal for the Leafs until halfway through the season. And that seems like it was so long ago. And then they just tried many different things, and then going two defensemen one forward with David Kampf being the guy, hoping that they win the faceoff and then flipping him out right away. You don't need to do that. You can just go with a skilled guy who's responsibly sound in his own end, and someone like Ryan O'Reilly. And so it was just perfect that they were able to kind of do that and give a bit of a different look, because the overtime, at least from a 3-on-3 standpoint, yeah, they were getting some wins as of late, but I thought it could use a refresher. And Ryan O'Reilly's debut in that was certainly a positive, because they had the puck a lot, and that's what you want in overtime. And like, that's really the key to it, is get possession a lot, try to dominate that. If you don't score on your first chance, get back quickly and try to get that puck back again. And that's what the Leafs did.
So the overtime winner might mask things a little bit with regards to what we saw in the first 60 minutes, because at 5-on-5, you touched on the numbers. Minnesota definitely had more of the offensive chances, and Ilya Samsonov did a good job. And you got to give the defense credit as well, that, you know, they bent a couple of times, but did ultimately not break. I couldn't think of too many, you know, breakdowns in the defensive end against this Minnesota Wild team. Now, that being said, the Wild are one of the lower scoring offenses in the NHL, despite having guys like Kirill Kaprizov and, you know, Matt Zuccarello. They don't have a ton of dynamic offensive talents, but, you know, at 5-on-5 in those 60 minutes of regulation, the Tavares, O'Reilly, Marner line was probably the best line that the Maple Leafs had tonight. You know, I thought the fourth line was strong, as they have been, but as far as the top six goes, Bunting, Matthews, Nylander really had a tough time getting anything going. I thought tonight, you know, might have been a good opportunity to see what Ryan O'Reilly might do on the third line if Sheldon Keefe decided to put things in a blender. Ultimately, he did not. But, you know, now that we're starting to get a larger sample size here, you've seen the Maple Leafs play in, you know, up and down kind of tempo games against the Buffalo Sabres. Then you see a game like this where it's, you know, grind it to a halt type of game. Do you still feel like the Tavares, O'Reilly, Marner line should continue, or do you feel like we might see some changes when the Leafs head out west?
I think it should continue. I'm pretty sure from a matchup standpoint, it's going to change. In fact, in Sheldon Keefe's media availability, when he kind of touched on the different options that he has and things that he's going to work on, I kind of followed up and I kind of just asked if he had any sort of plan in mind at some point to just stop changing things. Like, are you going to reach a point in the season where you keep things the way they are for the most point? And he said, for the most part, I do have somewhere where I think that should kind of stick, but always going to be changing, because a lot of things are going to depend on matchups and what guys do against us. And last line change seems to be a big thing for Sheldon Keefe, especially in the playoffs. So it wouldn't surprise me if I'm going to predict this right now, and Aaron, save the audio if this happens. But I'm going to predict that we see a situation where Ryan O'Reilly's a third line center for road games, but the second line center for home games. Like one of those kind of things where the matchups are just not going right with the line change, where they feel they need to do kind of the spread offense from lines 1 to 3, where at home they feel they can do a bit of an overload. It just seems to be the Sheldon Keefe special when it comes to having the last change in matchups versus not having the line change. You saw this with Tampa last year. I mean, unless he really does want to play chess and do things different this year, that's what I'm predicting is going to happen between now and the playoffs, and even in the playoffs, just because there's going to be a lot of different shuffling. You can even see it as he's answering us that he's like already in like change mode.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a realistic option that Keefe could go with, depending whether the game's on the road or at home. And, you know, I think people have to remember as well, as much as, you know, the fourth line has been bolstered come playoff time, you know, they're not going to play a ton, the fourth line. It's usually the top three lines that go out there for the majority of the game. And if you have, you know, Ryan O'Reilly, John Tavares, and Austin Matthews as your three centers, whether it's at home or whether it's on the road, I mean, that's such a big advantage to have. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see as we continue to work our way towards the end of the season, what kind of different versions of this lineup Sheldon Keefe is going to throw out there. I mean, he's already said that, at some point, John Tavares is going to move back to center, but so far that hasn't been the case. There were some moments tonight just in the offensive zone where Keefe was trying to mix things up, having Matthews out there in an overloaded line with, Mitch Marner, William Nylander. We've seen it before with John Tavares and Austin Matthews and William Nylander, depending on the situation. So again, it just gives him so many more options having a guy like Ryan O'Reilly out there. But I just felt like tonight's game, it just kind of showed again that the Leafs are lacking another forward with some scoring chops, someone that, you can put in a game like this where it is tough to find the space, but, someone that can get to the front of the net and maybe create some havoc and bang a goal in. I know David Kampf did that tonight with his goal, but, this just felt too much like a playoff game and kind of gave you some visions of what the Maple Leafs might be facing as we get into mid-April.
Yeah, but I mean, at least they're winning these games. Like, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like, there's a lot of times where the opponents lull the Maple Leafs to sleep and then just pounce on it. And the big difference from this year versus last year against the better teams where this isn't happening, I feel goes back to that game against the Hurricanes where they were able to kind of show, okay, this is going to be this type of game. So we can't play the way we've normally played when it comes to teams that play the rush. So we have to just kind of sit back and play chess and wait and be patient. And to their credit, and it's almost hand in hand with William Nylander's maturity, because those are the kind of games where William Nylander would try to make something happen and would lead to a mistake, and it would result in a decision the other way. And that's not happening this time. And so as boring as and uninteresting as that was to watch, if it gets them the type of result that they can use as a template to show, hey, we have a B game here. We can beat teams playing different ways. That I think is huge, because it's gonna happen where, in a 7-game series, they're all different, right? Some are blowouts, some are really tight, some just kind of lead to unpredictability. And so the Leafs need to be able to go into the different matchups and the different things that they've done and be like, hey, this is what we did here. This is what we've got to do tonight. Or after the first period, if things are changing, guys, this isn't working. This is what we've got to do for the rest of the game. And this is what will lead us to success. And so the fact that they were able to win this type of boring game, I think is good for them, as uninteresting as it was to watch.
Yeah, it was not the most aesthetically pleasing game at 5-on-5 and for large stretches, but the Leafs, like you said, did come away with the 2 points. Shifting over to the special teams, I think, that was also a bit of a tough watch tonight, and got to tip your cap to Minnesota. They are one of the better penalty killing teams in all of the National Hockey League. So, I mean, this is definitely what they do. They don't give up a ton of chances. They don't give up a ton of opportunities when they're down a man, but it kind of gives you flashbacks again to some of the issues that the Maple Leafs have had come playoff time in previous years, where their power play has not translated from the regular season to the playoffs. And I got to be honest, there were a couple of moments tonight I didn't love the decision-making from, Morgan Rielly. And, I know he's trying to change it up when he's, shooting from the point, taking wrist shots, hoping for a deflection when nothing's happening. But at the same time, that's probably your last option that you want on the power play when you've got Marner, Tavares, Nylander, and Austin Matthews out there. I know you can't just consistently keep feeding it to one guy and be too predictable in that sense, but, it just feels like a situation where, maybe Morgan Rielly needs to defer a little bit more as opposed to taking a low percentage shot and praying that something good comes out of it.
Yeah. And, to that end, I mean, when that's happening and it's just not going to the right person, this is where you have Ryan O'Reilly on your second PP unit now, that maybe you can start thinking about splitting up the PP1 and PP2 more and not overloading when teams seem to kind of know the tendencies at this point. You may as well kind of change things up and give a bit of a different look. And maybe that's where you keep Matthews and Nylander on for longer for PP1 into PP2 before the other guys come on. And you can really do some damage that way and have different shooters there. Not having Rasmus Sandin doesn't help. Connor Timmins wasn't really kind of sharp on there either, but they have that 2 defenseman PP2, which I don't think is necessary. And a lot of that was just because PP1 stays on for so long that PP2 is also a transitionary power play, that I would like to see them just kind of split things up and kind of go back to that way when they have all these weapons now. That I just think that, if Austin Matthews is struggling to score and Morgan Rielly's not dishing it the same way, just make it even 1 minute apiece and try different things just to change it up on the opponents, because as overload as you do with the same guys, it just gives the opposition more time to figure out the tendencies, which augurs more change to change things up. So as much as we talk about Sheldon Keefe and the tinkering and all those kind of things that he does at even strength, the power play is something I think they need to do a little bit more to change things up and maybe change the tendencies from the opposing looks a little bit.
And if there's ever time to do it, it would be during the regular season, and there's still 20 plus games left to figure that out. So it kind of just gets back to, again, what you were saying with regards to Sheldon Keefe, and when will there come a day where he's like, okay, like, everything's set in pen. I didn't want to say stone because things are always going to change even come playoffs, but this is what we're going to run with. Like, let's try to get consistent with it as we get into the postseason. So now might still be the time, especially with Ryan O'Reilly in the mix. I mean, I don't know if you're going to get to a situation where you're taking John Tavares off the top power play unit or William Nylander off the top power play unit and putting Ryan O'Reilly out there. Like, I don't know if that's really the best decision to make.
But I'd like Ryan O'Reilly in the bumper.
Right, but I'm saying maybe they go back to the 5 forward power play with Ryan O'Reilly. Like, that could be an option as opposed to taking, one of the 4 forwards off, because I don't know if that necessarily makes it better. But, lots of different options that Sheldon Keefe could go with on the power play. It's definitely an area that the Maple Leafs are looking for some answers and looking for a little bit more consistency, because it's tough to watch the power play they had the other night where they look like the Harlem Globetrotters against the Buffalo Sabres with that Nylander goal, and then tonight they just weren't able to generate anything, albeit against a better penalty kill in the Minnesota Wild. But Ilya Samsonov, as you mentioned before, coming up big in this one, gave up just the one goal on the night, but really a play that wasn't his fault. Bounced off Calle Jarnkrok's skate and into the back of the net. The Leafs goalie made 24 saves and says it was important to bounce back after a tough third period against Buffalo.
It's a little bit hard start for me, yeah. Maybe especially after the Buffalo game, after the third period, I need a little bit change mental spot. Yeah, in the second and third period, I feel so comfortable.
And I think, these are always the games that are, pretty difficult, I think, if you're a goalie, Dave, and kind of that playoff atmosphere again. But, it's a 1-1 game and you're just hoping like, oh, I got to make every save possible here to keep us in it. Can't let anything goofy go in. Like you said, off the hop, Ryan Hartman almost fooled Samsonov to make it a 1-0 lead for the Minnesota Wild. But I thought Samsonov was really strong tonight after that first goal. And as he said, I mean, it was important to have a bounce back game after that one against Buffalo, because, I think that's the type of performance where maybe things could easily get, start to slip away because you're thinking, okay, everything's going great. And then you have a rough stretch in Buffalo and, he bounced back tonight.
Yeah. So there's that. I thought he had a bit of a rough go the game before that as well, although he had the stomach issues for the excuse for that one against Chicago. So you take both of those combined and, you start to look at, is this the beginning of something? In that first period, it could have really been bad if Hartman capitalized on that. And he did beat him, but he just got iron. And then he didn't even see the puck come out because it went right through him back out. So that was a nice little wake-up call for Samsonov. But after that, it seemed like he really kind of found his game. Like in that second period, he was shutting things down. And well, what was really the mark to me that he felt confident again was he made this little scoop save after a few shots where he kind of felt it off the pads. Then there was like an innocent looking sharp angle shot from in close, but he gets the glove in front of him and scoops it and kind of flashes it pointing up, which kind of that's the goalie's mark of whatever's coming to me is coming to me, and there's no rebound, no nothing, and I'm feeling pretty good. So that seemed to be, in my opinion, where the game kind of changed in terms of Samsonov's feel for the game. So that's important in these type of games. You need your goalies to step up, and he needed a good game from a save percentage standpoint. Matt Murray looks like he's coming along now, and the worst thing for Samsonov in terms of wanting to try to keep the net is if he was going to start struggling, and then they kind of have to go with Matt Murray, and then he takes the net. Not that it would necessarily be a problem, but with Matt Murray having not played for a long period of time, you kind of wondered, okay, what's going on here? Is this the time where they feel like they kind of have to rush along his development because Samsonov's starting to struggle, or what's going on? Because it's been kind of a hard situation to follow.
All right, so I was going to bring up Matt Murray because he was back on the ice and looks to be, I believe he's traveling with the team, right? He's going to be with them on this trip here. So, what do you think the plan is? Because we're getting close to the trade deadline, and, Joseph Wall, we've seen him in a few games here, and he's had moments where he's looked good, had moments where he's been not so good. And, if it gets to a point where maybe the Maple Leafs feel they need a little bit more assurance or insurance at the goaltending position, they'll need to make a move. So, do you feel like Matt Murray is going to get into one of these games before March 3rd?
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know, because if they need that cap space and they don't have anything else up their sleeve, activating him from LTI would not serve them well. So there's that to factor in. If he's not ready, he's not ready. But you do kind of want to see where he's at before you address if you have to make another add on the goaltending situations. But if he plays a game and then goes on LTI again and they have to reset the clock, that doesn't really make a lot of sense too. So, I mean, they could have him play for March 1st and then put him back on LTI if it goes horribly wrong and they make that decision. I just don't know who that benefits. If Matt Murray wants to come back and play and he feels he's ready, that's great. But it was a real 180, because before this practice and morning skate and all that stuff, he didn't look like he was kind of ready to go. Then 2 weeks ago, he's practicing by himself, looks pretty sharp, but they said he's going to be a while. And then there's times where I'm watching him with Curtis Sanford and it looks like they're rebuilding his game. That every day it just seems to be like you don't even know what to expect when you're watching Matt Murray on the ice there. And that's probably the most troubling thing about all this is the inconsistency of where this guy stands. And it kind of felt like Frederik Andersen all over again, although Frederik Andersen was not this injury prone. He's injury prone, but not this injury prone. So it's so confusing. And yeah, you do want to get some clarity. But I think more than anything else, if they're going to use that space, I think they really kind of want to add on D before they address the goaltending, because you don't have a lot to kind of play around with. It's going to be really difficult to maneuver without trading away a roster player here.
Yeah, it's such a difficult position to be in. I think if you're Kyle Dubas, and clearly, the front office knows
it's self-inflicted.
Yeah, but I mean, they know what's going on with Matt Murray, so I don't think, it's a situation where they're like, oh, maybe it is. I don't know, where they have no idea what to expect here. I'm sure they have a sense one way or another if, he's going to be ready to come back at some point, or, if this is going to be a longer term thing, because then they can, use that cap space to add somewhere, and maybe it's between the pipes. But I would just be, hard pressed to think that they're sitting here right now on February 24th, 25th, and being like, we have no idea what's going to happen. I'm sure they talk to Murray on a consistent basis, talk to Curtis Sanford, talk to the training staff to get a sense of, what is your lean here? What do you think's happening? And then we'll see come next Friday what ultimately happens with the Maple Leafs and Matt Murray. But definitely one of the more strange things that we've had to talk about this year, just with regards to his health, his status, and where he is at. But luckily, Ilya Samsonov.
Goaltending's been weird, man.
Yeah, definitely is. And luckily, the Maple Leafs have Ilya Samsonov rolling right now and coming up big in this 2-1 win over the Minnesota Wild. Coming up, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day. We'll also talk about Mark Giordano tying an NHL record. Hasn't been around for a long time, this record, but Gio can now say he is tied for first. So we'll talk about that coming up. It is Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. You're listening to Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Naslund.
We weren't afraid of facing any line or any deep pairing because we knew that we would generate offense.
Bertuzzi.
I was like, I can play in this league and I can play a big role in this league and I can be dominant if all the stars align.
Morrison.
There was a confidence that we believed if we went out and played the way we were capable of, we could score every shift.
Their story in their words. Unreal West Coast Express. Available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena. Leafs picking up the 2-1 win over the Minnesota Wild. William Nylander with the overtime goal. Time for the Bodog line of the day. And if you picked David Kampf to score in this one, you would have been rewarded very handsomely for that. Kampf spoke post-game about his goal.
I saw Willie had a little bit time behind the net, so I tried to get in front of the net and try to find some space. And he gave me a nice pass, and I tried to put it up, and it was in.
And now that's a couple of goals in his last 4 games or so here, Dave. And you look at the roster and the way it is right now with the additions of Noel Acciari and Ryan O'Reilly. I think a lot of people have been wondering, what happens here with David Kampf. I think the coaching staff, the front office, do really like this guy. They went out and got him for a reason a couple of off seasons ago when nobody had really ever heard of him. He was coming off a year where he just could not score whatsoever. He is never going to be, a big time offensive player. Of course, he is all about the defensive side of the game. But, if he can't provide the occasional goal here or there, like he, hasn't been for the most part, for the last couple of months, what do you think his role is on this team? Is he still going to be the 3C, the 4C, or is he potentially going to be completely out of the lineup depending on the matchup?
I don't think he's going to be out of the lineup. I think defensively they still need David Kampf. I do believe that they believe in him. If it's a matter of moving Acciari to the wing to make up a fourth line, if they do move Ryan O'Reilly down, so be it. That's what they'll do. But I don't see him being pushed out of the lineup by any means. I think Acciari has, taken a lot of the responsibility on PK and has really strengthened that fourth line to the point that it feels like a third line in terms of the minutes. And again, they were the best line from an underlying statistical standpoint today in a tight game. That's a feather in Noel Acciari's cap for sure. But David Kampf is going to be relied upon heavily from a defensive standpoint, whether it's the new fourth line or whatever they have in there. I just don't see it. And injuries are going to happen as well. It's impossible to expect that this will be a perfect run going all the way through. But, as far as his future beyond this year, I think there are Kampf replacements in the wings and it's an easy position to kind of replace. But I do think that David Kampf is going to be part of that bottom 6. Whether he gets pushed to the wing, I don't know. But I think that they still need his defensive responsibilities, especially the chemistry he has with Mitch Marner on PK. I think that really helps.
Yeah, I mean, he still does a lot of really good things. It's not as if he's been completely replaced by, the additions of Noel Achari and Ryan O'Reilly. But if they do decide to bump down O'Reilly, you wonder, what that could mean, because I don't know if you necessarily want to run a Kampf Achari right wing line. I mean, maybe you do, but it just feels like there might be too many cooks in the kitchen at that point if, that's the decision that the Leafs do go with. And, they still could make an addition, before the trade deadline up front. I would be surprised if that would be the case, because you said it and I think it as well. If they're going to make another addition, it will be on the back end, whether it be on the blue line or in goal. But, maybe there is another spot that Kyle Dubas feels like he needs to upgrade, and maybe that is on third line wing potentially. And all the other guys that we saw earlier this season that, got a different run on that fourth line, Bobby McMahon, haven't really talked about him much with the Marlies, but he's been on an incredible goal scoring run of late. And I made a prediction the other day. I feel like Bobby McMahon going to be the fourth line left wing come playoff time. I don't know if that's a bold prediction or a hot take or anything, but I just feel like he can do so many things and, still add some offensive punch. So maybe that could be something that happens down the line as well. But I digress with regards to David Kampf. Nice to see him get a goal tonight. Meanwhile, interesting topic to talk about here. Mark Giordano coming into the game needed 3 block shots to tie the all-time record, which has only been on record since the 05-06 season. He ties his former Calgary Flames teammate Chris Russell now with 2,044. But our own David Alter, doing some research earlier today, seems to have found a loophole. You went back in the old records, you dusted it off, and you dove into the numbers, and apparently this might not actually be the legit record. What do you have to tell the people out there?
Well, okay, this is just so silly because I think the attention this got was just through people online, right? Like they kind of looked and they saw the records and he was closing in on it, and records.nhl.com has Chris Russell as a leader at 2,044. And, they have a certain amount of games and whatnot. And then if you go to miscellaneous and sort by blocks, then that's how you get that number. However, I went a different way because I was trying to look up the record to see if this was in fact the record. And I stumbled upon going into the scoring per game category because I just kind of went in a back end way of trying to navigate stats.nhl.com or whatever it was. And when I sorted by blocks, it actually has Zdeno Chara at first with 2,233 through 1,680 games played. And that's almost 200 more than Russell or Giordano. And I'm like, well, this is weird. So before jumping to any sort of conclusion, I thought it might be a glitch. And so I emailed the stats department at the NHL, and they got back to me. And I will read you what they said to me, because this was very interesting. Now, granted, this is a record since 05-06. So, in theory, it's hard to know, right? But the fact of the matter is they were tracking block shots before 05-06. But according to them, they weren't doing it on a consistent basis. But game sheets still had that. So block shots have been consistently tracked since 2005-2006, which is what's reflected on both records.nhl.com, which I mentioned, and the miscellaneous report at nhl.com/stats. Zdeno Chara there is listed with 1,500 and 1,752 at both links. The scoring per game report at NHL.com stats seems to include his totals from 97 to 98 to 2003 to 2004. Select games logged them during those seasons, creating incomplete blocked shots data. Therefore, would recommend using records.nhl.com or the miscellaneous report and going with the since 05-06 disclaimer. Hope this helps. So, that doesn't sound like a record to me. It sounds like, Zdeno Chara, in fact, did have more block shots by a healthy sum because they themselves tracked it. So it's weird. So I'm sure in 100 years, people will look at it and be like, okay, fine, because it's such a subjective stat. And people had fun with it. But it was just weird that the NHL would that there would be a visible way for me to see a sort by blocks and it's not Chris Russell, that it was actually Zdeno Chara. Like, if I didn't see that, we're not even having that conversation. But it can't be unseen. And it's on their own freaking website. So, yeah. Good for Mark Giordano, but like just a weird ass caveat to a stat that needs, like, if they're going to have those shots, go back into the footage. They have the library, and just go back to the data and figure it out from a longer time frame.
Yeah, what poor intern would have to do that job? That would be just like the worst thing ever.
Remember when we worked in radio? Remember when we worked in radio that the interns had to like do a lot of crazy stuff? Like, my favorite was, it wasn't an intern thing, but a lot of the board ops would just have to sit in an archive room and listen to the dubs of old reels from the 92-93 Blue Jays play-by-play and digitize that stuff.
Okay, that is bad. That is bad. I never had to do it personally, but I do remember hearing about that and thinking, yeah, no thanks. That would be just absolutely awful. But to go back and watch archive footage and trying to count block shots on grainy
stats, people would love
video footage. Maybe. I mean, maybe there are some the weirdos out there that would love to go back and watch games. Right, I guess you could, but still, it's just the amount of games that you'd have to watch. It's definitely not a one-person job. It is. It would take a lot of people to sort it all out. Now, that being said, it's not as if Zdeno Chara, bought a ticket to the Leafs game tonight and was like holding up a sign that said, "I'm the true record holder here." Like, he probably doesn't even know this. Like, I don't think he's putting up a big stink about it. Maybe somebody brought it up to him today, but
yeah. Well, no, he's not like saying that the NHL screwed Chara and the NHL is going back to him and saying Zdeno Chara screwed Zdeno Chara.
Yeah, this is not like some, amazing stat or amazing record that anybody is incredibly proud to hold. Like, Mark Giordano, I think even talking about it today, you could tell he's like, yeah, it's fine. Like, it's cool. But he's not like going to be going home at night and, telling everybody that he's now tied for first and potentially the all-time, shot block record from 05-06. So it's just kind of a weird, fun sort of, trivia question with regards to Mark Giordano and his career. And, barring, some injury or something, it feels like he's probably going to play at least a, few hundred more games. And maybe he will surpass Zdeno Chara after all. And we won't have to worry about this conversation with regards to who is the true shot block king. But I love what the Leafs did.
I'm giving it to Zdeno Chara.
The shin pad. You're giving it to Zdeno Chara? Okay. Well maybe they should. It's true. Like, I mean, you can't argue with it. The stat's there. It's there for everyone to see on NHL.com, so you can't really dispute it at this point. And I don't think Mark Giordano is going to dispute it. But yeah, something to keep an eye on. I'm sure when he gets to that number with Zdeno Chara, we can have this conversation all over again with regards to who
I'll give it to him for real,
true king. There you go. You'll give him the golden shin pad. I think Morgan Riley was joking about that.
Yeah.
Would have been funny had they stopped the game like they did for LeBron James when he surpassed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think that would have been kind of funny.
They made that joke.
If Mark Giordano's like trying to shake off a shot block and he's being honored while hunched over, that would have been quite the interesting scene. But luckily, not the case tonight with regards to Giordano and the Maple Leafs. All right, just got a couple of minutes left here, and the Leafs, of course, getting ready now to head out west. Always a fun time for some West Coast late night hockey. Only the one game that's 9:00 Eastern when the Maple Leafs head to Calgary, so nothing too crazy like we saw earlier this year with some 10:30 Eastern games out in San Jose and Anaheim. But your second time out west, what are you going to be keeping an eye on here during this 4-game stretch?
If the Leafs change things up, like we were talking about, if they actually start doing the spread offense with the 3 lines and some of their depth there on the road with the last line change, Seattle's going to be a very difficult test. I can't believe I'm saying that this season, just given how they played last year. But Seattle's been very good this year. and they seem to really reshape everything. And I'm excited to see how they do in that game. It's going to be a weird one because they'll have a light skate tomorrow, and it'll be a 4:00 local game in the Pacific time zone. So there's not going to be a lot of time to adjust to the time zone. And so it wouldn't surprise me if the Leafs get off to a bit of a sluggish start there, because it can be pretty tiring trying to adjust. And the Leafs have not had the favorable schedule with that. I remember they went to Vegas. It was a 2-hour time change, but they flew in from Winnipeg, had the one day, and then had to play a game in Vegas. And that was pretty rough for them. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. The Canadian teams and how they bounce back there. I mean, they should be able to walk over Vancouver. Calgary, looking to try to push something. Edmonton, that's a maybe team that's trying to show where they kind of measure up. And so I got to imagine that they'll be really up for that game against the Leafs. And then wrapping that all up is New Jersey, and that's going to be the first time the Leafs have been there since beer bottles were thrown at them. And so I'm curious to see what kind of extra security the Leafs go into with that, because I remember their reaction to that game was pretty nuts.
Yeah,
also
I guess we'll have to keep an eye on who. I guess we'll have to keep an eye on who the officiating crew is for that. Maybe don't send the same guys out there for that game against the Devils. But should be a fun West Coast road trip with some big-time games, some big-time opponents for the Maple Leafs.
Days.
And, of course, we'll have you covered. A lot of games over a short amount of time. We'll have you covered here on Rink Wide Toronto. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on Twitter, RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pre-game, post-game, every game.
Hey, it's Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. And Ray, we're into the second half of the NHL season, and the trade deadline is obviously getting closer.
Every night, wins and losses are starting to mean more as teams try to stay in the mix in the standings to secure that playoff spot. And man, some teams could use some help before the deadline.
Yeah, we've got the storylines, trade rumblings all covered, along with the top hockey guests twice weekly, right here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get podcasts.